You wake up and your breath fogs the air above your face. No heater, no blanket from a store, just fur, fire, and the people breathing next to you. For tens of thousands of years, this was not a survival story. This was Tuesday. 20,000 years ago, the planet was locked inside the last glacial maximum. Ice sheets buried most of northern Europe and North America under walls of frozen water taller than any building you have ever stood inside. Temperatures in some regions sat far below anything modern humans experience outside of a freezer aisle. And yet, in the middle of that frozen world, people were living. Not just surviving in bursts. Living. Raising children, making art, falling asleep warm. How? Your body is not built for extreme cold. Not really. You lost most of your fur hundreds of thousands of years ago, back when your ancestors needed to sweat off heat on the hot African savanna. That trade paid off for a hunter chasing prey under the sun. It became a serious liability the moment your species pushed north into ice. So something had to change. Not your body, your behavior. Anthropologist Ian Gilligan has spent years studying exactly this problem. He argues that clothing was not just a convenience for ancient humans, it was a technology as important as fire, and its invention reshaped how your ancestors survived, migrated, and even evolved. Early hominins may have draped loose hides over their shoulders for warmth, but loose hides were not enough for the deep cold of the Ice Age. You needed something sealed, something fitted, something that trapped a layer of warm air directly against your skin. That shift shows up in the archaeological record in a small, easy-to-miss object, a needle. At Sungir, a site in modern-day Russia dated to roughly 34,000 years ago, archaeologists uncovered burials of Ice Age humans covered in thousands of small ivory beads. When researchers studied the placement of those beads, they found dense bands around the wrists, ankles, and torso, arranged in patterns that only make sense if they were once sewn onto tailored clothing. Not a cape, not a wrap. Fitted garments, stitched with eyed needles, cut and shaped to the body the way a modern parka is shaped to yours. Think about what that means. Someone sat by firelight, working a bone needle through hide, again and again, stitch after stitch, so that a child could survive a night that would kill an unprotected adult in hours. That is not a footnote in a textbook. That is an act of love with a needle instead of words. Clothing solved one problem. Shelter solved another. And in the coldest, most exposed parts of the Ice Age world, there were no trees left standing to build with. The steppes stretched out flat, frozen, and almost entirely treeless. So your ancestors built with what the land actually gave them. At Mezhirish, in what is now Ukraine, archaeologists found the remains of dwellings built from mammoth bones. Skulls stacked to form a base. Long bones arched upward like a rib cage. Tusks curved into door frames. An estimated hundreds of bones per structure, likely gathered from animals that had already died naturally, then dragged and assembled into a windbreak strong enough to hold up under a covering of hide. This was architecture, engineered, load-bearing, cold-weather architecture designed by people with no metal tools and no written blueprints. Inside a structure like that, a hearth changed everything. Fire did more than provide heat. It let people cook food that would otherwise be nearly impossible to digest in an Ice Age landscape, with almost no edible plants for months at a time. Anthropologist Richard Wrangham has argued that control of fire and cooking fundamentally reshaped the human body over evolutionary time, freeing up energy that once went entirely into digestion. In an Ice Age winter, that same fire did something just as critical in the short term. It kept blood flowing to fingers and toes. It dried wet hide. It turned a dangerous night into a survivable one. So picture it. A cluster of mammoth bone dwellings sits low against the wind on the open steppe. Smoke rises from a hearth just inside the entrance. A woman sits close to the fire, an ivory needle in her hand, working thread made from sinew through a hide sleeve. A child watches her, wrapped in a smaller version of the same tailored coat. Outside, the wind moves across a landscape with almost no shelter for miles. Inside, it is not comfortable by modern standards, but it is warm enough. And warm enough, night after night, is the entire difference between a population that survives an Ice Age and one that does not. Here is the part that surprises most people. Ancient humans in the deep cold were not weaker or worse fed than we assume. In many cases, the archaeological evidence points the other way. Skeletal remains from Ice Age hunter-gatherer sites often show strong, robust bones and good nutritional health, built on diets rich in animal fat and protein from mammoth, reindeer, and other cold-adapted megafauna. Anthropologist Richard Lee's classic 1963 fieldwork among the Kalahari's Jew/Hawansi people, a very different environment but a related question, found that hunter-gatherer populations often worked fewer hours to meet their caloric needs than early agricultural societies that came later. Cold climate hunter-gatherers were not living on the edge of starvation, scraping by until winter finally broke. They were running a system. Fat-rich meat solved the calorie problem. Tailored clothing solved the heat loss problem. Bone architecture solved the shelter problem. And social groups sharing labor and food across a band solved the problem no individual body could solve alone. That last part matters more than it sounds like it should. A single person, however skilled, could not track migrating herds, build a mammoth-bone shelter, keep a fire burning through the night, and sew a full set of tailored winter clothing, all alone, fast enough to survive a single brutal season. Survival in the Ice Age was never really an individual accomplishment. It was a group technology distributed across many hands, many skills, and many generations of trial and error passed down by watching, not reading. And here is the twist most people never expect. The invention of agriculture, the moment usually taught as human progress finally arriving, actually made health worse for a long stretch of history. Skeletal studies across multiple early farming populations show a drop in height, an increase in tooth decay, and a rise in infectious disease compared to the hunter-gatherer populations that came before them. Settling in one place packed people closer together, next to their own waste and their domesticated animals, in conditions that produced more disease, not less. The Ice Age hunter surviving a brutal winter in a mammoth-bone hut was, by several biological measures, healthier than the early farmer who came thousands of years later. Warmth was never really about the fire itself. It was about coordination. It was about someone else caring enough to sew that sleeve, stack that skull into the wall, keep that hearth fed through the coldest hour of the night. You already know this, even if you have never had to sew your own coat by firelight. Think about the last time you were sick, or overwhelmed, or simply cold in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. What actually helped was rarely a single clever trick. It was someone showing up. A blanket someone else grabbed for you. A meal someone else made when you didn't have it in you. A group, however small, choosing to keep you warm. Your ancestors did not outsmart the Ice Age with brute toughness. They outlasted it together, needle by needle, bone by bone, fire by fire. And that instinct, the one that makes you reach for another person when things get hard, is not some modern comfort layered on top of a tougher ancient self. It is the oldest survival technology you have. You wake up and your breath fogs the air above your face. This time, there is no fur, no fire, no hearth glowing at the entrance of a mammoth-bone hut. Just a warm room and the quiet, inherited certainty that someone, somewhere back along that impossibly long chain, made sure you would live long enough to be here.